Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my 2023 BookTube Prize Quarterfinals Ranking video. So the BookTube Prize was started here on BookTube by Robert at Barter Hordes, although the judging pool, I believe, comes from a wider range of literary bookternet people. And the point of the prize is to judge the best in literary fiction and nonfiction published in English the year before in the US. So this year we are judging books published in 2022. And through 4 rounds, we whittled down long lists of 48 books per division. And in October, we will finally have one winner in fiction and in nonfiction. But now, here we are in the beginning of June, and we have just wrapped up the second round, the quarterfinals round. And I was a judge. I judged nonfiction Group A. And this is unusual for me, but I decided not to script this video, which I'm a little nervous about because, you know, it's probably going to be one of the more popular videos on my channel just because of this shared interest. I certainly hope other judges are keen to hear how we have all ranked these books, because we've all had to be quiet about it while judging, but now we get to explain ourselves, and I'm eager to see more videos. I've seen a couple so far, but I'd love if more people made more videos. I feel a little out of sorts with this round, really. I don't think I identified as much with most of the books as much as I thought I would. And in this round, I'm very out of step with the judges. This is my worst showing ever. That out of the 3 books I chose to advance to the next round, only one of them made it. So that's intriguing as well. Anyway, I'm obviously filming this after having watched the video where Robert announced which books made it to the semifinals. I will, of course, link to that video down below. So in a way, I think this is going to be a little bit reactionary. It's giving me talking points, of course, about how I can talk about how I thought about and judged the books on my ballot. So yeah, but actually the first thing I'm going to do here is talk about stats more generally. These are the long list contenders for fiction and nonfiction that I printed out in January because I'm signed up to be a judge for both fiction and nonfiction. And of these lists, we could have, all the judges could vote for 20 books to make it to the long list. And then from our votes, Robert created the long list. So anyway, back in the day, for the octafinals, going into the octafinals, 12 of the 20 books I chose for both fiction and nonfiction made it to the first round, to the octafinals round. Then going into the quarterfinals round, 8 of those books remained in fiction and 7 of those books remained in nonfiction. And now, going into the semifinals round of all the books I personally chose to be on the long list, 6 of those books remain in fiction, but only 1 of those books remain in nonfiction. Very intriguing. The book in nonfiction is An Immense World by Ed Young, and it's a science book, so that's exciting as well. Certainly there are some science books remaining for the semifinals, but none of the others I voted for made it. But that being said, there were 2 books I really loved in the octafinals that are still in the running for the semifinals, so that's exciting. The Escape Artist is one of them, and then His Name is George Floyd is the other. I still am kind of betting that His Name is George Floyd might win the whole shebang for nonfiction. We'll have to see. And then when it comes to fiction, well, I think the biggest book I'm disappointed about is The Marriage Portrait. That one, you know, was voted out in the quarterfinals, and I was hoping that it would make it to the final round. We'll all likely be reading for fiction, and I would love the excuse to read that, you know, for the finals round, but I guess I'll have to make time for it on my own because it's no longer in the running. And there are plenty of other books that are still in the fiction semifinals that sound really great, some that I really want to read, and one of them Our Wives Under the Sea, which I already have read and really enjoyed, and it still is in the running. So very exciting stuff going on in fiction. So without further ado, I'm now going to get into my official ranking of quarterfinals nonfiction. Group A, I feel iffy about some of my ranking, especially about my 5th and 6th choice, which actually, upon reflection, I wish I had changed them and, you know, judged my 6th book as number 5 and my 5th book as number 6, but what can you do? I already submitted my ballot, obviously, it's already over. So I'll go ahead and I'll start with the book that I ranked as number 6, which is Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino. So this book is a bit of a tour de force where Dan Saladino kind of trots around the world, although I think it is largely European based, but he goes other places as well. And he finds specific communities in various places that have food staples that, you know, they've grown usually for years, and it just comes from the soil and their personal environs, which plays into Saladino's big thesis. He's looking at the history of food, global food, and particularly the paradigm shift that happened especially after World War II in 1945, where there was a lot of mass production and monoculture food going on out of necessity because of how that war upended communities across the world and basically their food production and all other sorts of production. So it was necessary then to feed people, but now he's looking at it and seeing the ill effects of this mass production monoculture food, where, you know, we mostly create foods now that can be shipped across the world, and food that wouldn't you know, survive that shipping process is more to the wayside now, and so we're getting fewer nutrients, and it's also, I'm sure, affecting, you know, species you know, around the world as well for food. His big thesis is to maybe try to get us to eat more organic foods. I mean, he understands that you can't, you know, change the tidal wave of how food is produced globally, but, you know, making small incremental changes he thinks would be healthier for us and for the planet, and, you know, to keep, you know, fewer foods from going extinct. And this was, you know, huge. It really, I think this was the start for me of reading a bunch of books that felt like a lot of information crammed in. I mean, we'd go into this one culture and I'd be learning about this specific type of food for a few pages, and then, you know, whoosh, we'd be somewhere else immediately. And I got a lot of whiplash and I felt a little overwhelmed, and I'm not sure I really liked how the book went that way, that it was just a little too much information and it was overwhelming. And anyway, I actually just listened to Janet, Remembered Reads, talk about her BookTube Prize nonfiction ballot, and I think she leaned into something, or at least I was thinking about it from what she said about books that, you know, are really a bird's eye view of the subject. And I guess this is really what this book was meant to be. You're just getting like a few pages on each food and each culture group and that sort of thing. And for me, I struggled with that, but in a way, you know, it was a nice way to learn a lot of information, I guess. But I struggled with it. But now I really do wish I had at least, you know, put this book as number 5. And it was very impressive in that way. But there were some other ways that I struggled with this book. First of all, I feel like the thesis doesn't really work. Like, you know, at the end he talks about, oh, well, maybe you can do this or that organically and, you know, get food that way that, you know, is a little more diverse. But I feel like he didn't actually address the fact that not every person in the world has access to fertile land and that sort of thing, or the money to buy organically. I feel like at the end of the day, he didn't really justify the thesis about how it could actually be done for most people. That's my takeaway. One of the things the cover copy or so forth of this book talks about is how, you know, capitalism is bad for, you know, discouraging diversity in food, and, you know, really encouraging monocultures and whatever makes money. And, you know, there's a lot of ways, especially in leftist discourse, to pick at legitimate failings of capitalism. But at the same time, a lot of these chapters actually were about communism coming in and destroying these diverse food cultures in the name of the state, especially in Soviet examples, and some in Chinese as well. And I guess it niggled at me that, I wondered if there was that political bias. Like, it's easy to denigrate what you don't believe in as much for a lot of people who think capitalism has gone too far, but especially on the far left, are a lot more forgiving in a way of communism. At least that was something that niggled at me, that maybe there was a little bit of political bias at play, and not, fully taking a certain thing to heart. Yeah, that's some of the reasons why I decided to rank this book on the lower end of things, but I do in fact wish I had at least ranked it at number 5. So here is the book that I ranked as number 5, but I actually, upon reflection, think is, for me, the weakest book of this round, and it is Secret City by James Kirchick. So Secret City is a history of the gay movement, as it were, in Washington, D.C., and Kirchick's major focus is on presidential administrations and insiders, people who worked for the government, and who were largely ostracized by what was called the Lavender Scare, especially in the 1950s under McCarthyism. But really his book starts, again, with a focus on World War II and how that sort of upended something culturally, because in that era in the U.S., the idea of homosexuality became something different culturally. It shifted from being something kind of privately sinful, I suppose, and seen as a quiet sort of disease that families had to take care of on their own, and it shifted into something that was more publicly a menace. And public discourse decided to link homosexuality to the ideas of communism and Sovietism, and the fact that there is so much shame around homosexuality bred the idea that homosexual people in government office were a danger to the country because they could be blackmailed for information by Soviets. And his major focus is on when homosexuality was sort of scandalous. So he ends with a few minor notes in the Clinton administration, but by that point, of course, homosexuality is now understood as a identity group that gay people or LGBTQ people are starting to foment as an identity group, following the leads of civil rights and the women's movement and that sort of thing. And it's no longer a closeted case, and now more people know gay people in their lives, and so by that point it's no longer the secret anymore that they're on their way to better equality, as it were. And so there's an interesting thing at play here too, because Kirchick is deliberately focusing on insiders. Like, a lot of the people he's chronicling are people who work for the state and believe in the state, and that of course skews things very heavily into white gay men. And so there's only there's a couple, but very few in comparison, lesbians and gay people of color whom he, chronicles in the book. And I feel like on its surface, I can respect what he's trying to do. I think maybe the biggest failing of the book is that it doesn't seem that deep to me. It really seems like a gossip rag. And I feel like I respect that maybe he'd want to give a different outlook. Most of looking at gay culture, especially during the secret time, is looking at the rebels and the people who were on the outside, as most gay people were for the 20th century, on the outsides trying to change things through protests and other means. And he decided to look at the insiders who were struggling, just to survive in especially working federal jobs. But at the end of the day, I felt like he was mostly gossiping. I mean, he accrued an impressive amount of information, but I felt like he didn't really go that deep into it. After a while, it really just felt like he was, at a party saying, oh, and this happened with such and such and such and such with this and that. And I just thought it was shallow. And I feel like he didn't go deep into the themes. Like, if you're going to talk about people who lived in the system, I kind of want to know how they justified. A lot of the time, these people, in fact, were conservative gay people, anti-communist gay people. And I wanted more justification. I felt like, again, he's a conservative writer who maybe is a little too much in his own bubble because he's writing about these conservative anti-communist thinkers. But, you know, what they're being persecuted by isn't communism, it's their anti-communist government. And I felt like, you know, maybe he should have, you know, demanded a little more from his subjects in as much as he could. I just felt like there was a lot more like deeper contradictory waters that he could have gone into rather than just a gossip rag. So yeah, that's why ultimately I feel like this book deserves to be at the bottom. And, you know, Eating to the Extinction, which I just talked about, actually is still in the running, and this one is not. And even though I technically ranked this book higher, I am kind of glad that this is the one that is no longer in the running. And I feel like my fellow judge group made the right choice between the two of these books, at least. In my number 4 spot, I put The Facemaker by Lindsay Fitzharris, which also is, in fact, moving on to the next round. And I guess I also am debating with myself, too, about switching my 4th and 3rd places. I feel a little less sure about that, but I wonder if I should have, because I do feel like maybe I enjoyed this book more than I enjoyed my 3rd place book, but at the same time, I guess this is going again into issues I had with too much information. In this case, too much information in too few pages. This was one of the shorter books. And this was sort of a biography of Harold Gillies, who was an eminent plastic surgeon who made breakthroughs to especially facial reconstruction during World War I, which was a war very much that in the battles left more people alive, but with more disfiguration. And facial disfiguration, of course, is one of the worst sorts of disfiguration to live with. She certainly goes into that in the book, that, you know, there's just so much cultural importance put on the face. So there was a lot of pressing desire from doctors to be able to reconstruct people's faces, and that required a lot of innovative skills, which Gillies was really at the front of in the hospital he worked at. Even though in other parts of the book, the author does go into the fact that reconstructive surgery has been around in some way or another for a long time, like since ancient times even, but of course, World War II really brought things into the modern age, and it was fascinating. It wasn't quite a biography exactly, although it did go a little bit into Harold Gillies' life, especially at the time, but it also jumped around to this or that person who got this or that surgery. And similar to Eating to Extinction, I thought I had trouble focusing or remembering people after, like, she jumped away from them for a little amount of time, but I feel like taking a step back, it's such a fascinating book as well, and something that I think a lot of people could get something out of it. We can chronicle the life of this one innovative man who I think in a lot of ways is largely forgotten, although he was ultimately knighted for his work. Yeah, I found it a moving book, and I feel like the specifics didn't stick with me as much as I hoped, but I wonder if that was more a problem with me. And then to compare it to the book I actually put as number 3, I wonder if even in my case, this book is more interesting to me on a human scale than the next book. So I guess I'll use that as my transition to go into the top 3 books, at least that I voted forward into the semifinals. So the first of these books I put in the number 3 spot is Breathless by David Quammen. This is the only book on my ballot that I personally voted for to make it onto the long list. I admittedly was really interested in reading a book on COVID-19 and where we were with the virus now. Not everybody is into that, and not everybody would really be into the science of this book either. This book is highly scientific, even if it's a pop science sort of thing, where the author is very deliberately trying to use some metaphors or other sort of casual language to draw the non-scientific reader into what he's talking about. But at the same time, I do feel that the subject matter is a little reclusive to most nonfiction readers, I think, and that when I reflect upon this book versus The Facemaker, I think that one had a little more of a human heart. But this one, I thought, I ultimately put as number 3 at the time, and maybe I still want to stick with it, because I thought for what it was trying to do, I thought it really was impressive. You know, there was just so much in here about other viruses that humans have been studying, that have been in the human population for like the last 50 years. And that, of course, points to the scientific fact that COVID-19 was not that surprising to the scientific community, that such a virus could turn into a pandemic, and it was kind of only a matter of time. It is a rather depressing book in that way. You know, we get into how COVID-19 is probably going to be with us forever, just the particular ways that it mutates and it lives within humans, and that it often has been devastating to humans, so many fatalities. And he goes into, the animals that it might have come from, and just the tireless research. And I really respect, from a scientific point, what he was trying to do. And he was writing along this knife's edge of, we're human beings are a people, we want to assign blame. And, so much of the origin of how COVID-19 came into our lives came from China. So, there's a lot in there about like looking scientifically at the realities of these animal markets that could inculcate the virus on that sort of scale, but not, casting mass blame on, entire cultures or that sort of thing. And also he does something somewhat similar in talking, especially dipping slightly into the political realities, especially in the US, where we had a government, a presidential administration in the beginning, which was keen to sort of ignore aspects of the pandemic. He touched a little bit on that, but it was largely about the science, and I think it was a nice reminder of how science works and how virology works, and how genomes work, and all sorts of other science words I can't actually pretend to know all that well. I thought this was nice. I thought that it was nice to have a book in this vein, but at the same time, it had a little less of that human heart, I think, so that I certainly didn't want to put it in my number 1 or 2 spot. And getting to my number 1 and 2 spots, I definitely feel a lot more personally confident about where I put these books, no matter what my fellow judges believe, sorry to say. But I am going to start with my number 2 book, which has continued on into the semifinals, and that is Sandy Hook by Elizabeth Williamson. Living now in the America of today, when we hear Sandy Hook, we think of yet another shooting massacre, which is such an unfortunate part of American society right now. But of course that could, dovetail into so many things, like talking about gun control or talking about mental health. And both of these things are kind of in this story, but really what Williamson wanted to focus on was conspiracy theories, which kind of takes things into an entirely different direction. And in fact, a lot of nonfiction, I think, uses whatever they're talking about, which is often historical, and they have to make some sort of comparison to what's going on now. So in this case, she talks a lot about how conspiracy theories, starting with Sandy Hook, led us in a lot of ways to January 6th and to the insurrection going on then. And that sort of thinking, which was largely influenced by personalities like Alex Jones, led us to where we are today. So there are a few chapters in the book that, go into January 6th and some of the Trump-era conspiracy theories as well. And she also goes and talks to Deborah Lipstadt, which I really appreciate. Deborah Lipstadt is the envoy for anti-Semitism, and she became famous for a British trial that where she was defending herself really against David Irving, a Holocaust denier, and she had to basically prove that the Holocaust and the Holocaust denial is like one of the biggest conspiracy theories out there, and it's sort of at the tail end of a lot of Jewish conspiracy theories, anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. So part of what I arched my eyebrow about this book is like, no, conspiracy theories did not start with Sandy Hook, but I do think that it changed things a lot about conspiracy theories in modern American culture, and how these sort of radio personalities or political personalities spoke more and more to people within political bubbles, and really inculcated that sort of thinking. And so it started with Sandy Hook, and it started, it's just crazy to think about starting with the deaths of children and the sufferings of their families, but there are people in this country who have come from a variety of political views, often anti-government views, or worried about their guns or that sort of thing. And that led them into a variety of thinking that, Sandy Hook was staged and fake. And it led to horrible things, especially for the families, especially the most vocal families, being harassed by strangers who have bought into this thinking hook, line, and sinker. So this book just really got to me about how it explored the reality of conspiracy theories. I think, like, basically, without, being a book that's a lot about mental health, it does talk about human realities, about our mental situations, and what leads us to want to believe in these sort of simple answer conspiracy theories that lean into our personal senses of paranoia, that sort of thing. I mean, there's obviously a range of people some people who would just quietly believe conspiracy theories versus some who would ultimately go on to physically and verbally harass survivors or people who disagree with them. And she just gets into all of that, and she also covers the Alex Jones trials when ultimately some of the Sandy Hook parents brought lawsuits against him. So yeah, this is a powerful book with a lot of, I think, important things to say about where we are, especially in the US, but I think probably more broadly too, I would assume, because the world is so small that there is certainly other types of conspiratorial thinking out there in the world. And what that's doing to our society, allowing this sort of thinking to have such a outsized part in our media. Another book that maybe bites off a lot of different subject matters, but ultimately it really hung together for me, and I found it to be very compelling. And in my #1 spot, which I am going to hold on to no matter that this is no longer in the running for the BookTube Prize, is Solito, which is the memoir by Javier Zamora. So this is a memoir which is about Zamora, who for 9 weeks in his very young life took this journey across the Sonora Desert, through Mexico, into the U.S. Zamora was born in El Salvador, and his parents made it across the border as migrants when he was very young and set up home there in Los Angeles. And once they did, they ultimately decided that they wanted their son to join them there. Their son Javier was being raised by his grandparents, and this required him being part of a system of a migrant system with a lot of moving parts. And it was particularly harrowing because Javier at the time was this 9-year-old boy who was traveling essentially alone. That he was traveling in a group with a bunch of adults, and several of them were with him the entire time, but before the journey started, he didn't know any of them except sort of vaguely one person from his hometown who in fact was a bit antagonistic to him. Everyone else he didn't know at all, but they had this experience together, and then after he did ultimately, after a few rough starts, make it into the U.S., he never actually saw any of these people again. And I think this started out as a therapeutic book for him, like really looking back at this really harrowing experience he had, because, there was a lot of hiding from the police and from authorities. There was a lot of, desperate attempts to mask your particular Spanish dialect, like especially in Mexico, where they were for a long time. And there were, you know, treks through the desert where they were going for days on end with limited food and water. I mean, it's just a harrowing experience. And, you know, there's obviously a lot of political realities we get into with this book and with this trek he took as a migrant. But I feel like at the bottom of it, it was just so viscerally human. Like, I just felt like I was right there with him. It was just amazing how he got into his mindset of where he was as a 9-year-old boy going through this experience that is just so beyond the scope of most anyone until you're, you know, forced into it. Just the psychological realities and also the physical realities, how he brought so much of the physicality back to life. You were just right there. And there was just no way this book wouldn't capture all of my attention and just, you know, grab me by the heart for these relationships. I mean, everything was just so infinite and so explored. I mean, I felt like I was with these people and I felt for them by the end of their journey. And I felt like, you know, maybe this is my team fiction bona fides coming out to talk, because I just felt like this book was about the essence of what it is to be human, in that interior way of just living through this experience and making it alive for the rest of us. I just thought this was incredible, and I'm just so sad that this book is no longer in the runnings for the BookTube Prize. And even though with some other books on the list I feel like I could say, you know what, fellow judges, maybe you made the right call and I made the wrong call, but in this case I know I made the right call. I'm sure there's some other people, or I assume there's some other people who also in my group rated this highly. I know I was in the chat during the live stream of Robert's video and other people were disappointed that Salito was no longer in the running. So I hope you'll consider picking it up, even though it's you know, no longer an official book for the BookTube Prize. I thought this was hands down my favorite of the batch. Well, and that about covers it for me now. I will leave the Goodreads reviews I wrote for all 6 of these books now that I am officially allowed to post them. And also I'll leave a link to the BookTube Prize page where you can catch up on the semifinals and where we are now. I am not taking part in the semifinals. I am taking a little bit of a break from the BookTube Prize, catching up on some other reading projects, and then I will be eager to join again for the finals, where it'll be, I believe, my first time judging fiction this year. So a lot of exciting stuff up ahead. Yeah, and I'll be back on this channel speaking of wrapping up reading projects. In May, I took part in the Maybe Midrash Readathon, which is about reading serious works of fiction and nonfiction having to do with religion. So I'll be back to talk about how I did with those books and a film in my next video, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to Robert for continuing to pull this project together with, you know, there are hundreds of judges across several continents. So thank you so much, and thank you to the judges, my fellow judges. I really hope more of you continue to post your videos and give your thoughts, or give your thoughts here on my video. I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.